criminal defense attorney. Welcome to the Veterans in Politics Nevada Assembly candidate interviews for April 14th, 2018. We would like to start with Stefan Sedilmeyer leading us in a brief invocation.
Dear Lord, bless all these candidates for what they're to do for the state of Nevada. Amen.
Do the same. Pledge of allegiance.
Now, if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. What we can start with is if each of the panel members would like to introduce themselves and briefly tell us who you are.
David?
My name is David Orenticher.
Panel members, your candidate.
Candidates.
My name is Robert Foust. I'm a former US Army Vietnam veteran. My name is Geraldi. I'm a former US Marine.
And now we will give each of the candidates a 1-minute opportunity to tell us who you are and why you would like to be elected to this position.
My name is David Orenticher. I teach at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, William S. Boyd School of Law. My background is in both medicine and law, so I teach health law and constitutional law. And when I lived in Indiana, I was a state representative there for 6 years. I worked hard on legislation to create jobs, to make healthcare more affordable, to protect children from child abuse and neglect. And it was a real privilege to serve. And I learned that you can do a lot for the public good when you're in your state legislature, and I'd like to return to public service and make my more contributions in the same kinds of areas to improve our healthcare system, to make it more affordable and accessible for people, to improve our schools, because I was fortunate to be able to go to med school and law school, and I was able to do that because I had a first-class education when I was growing up. We need to make sure all our children have that. We also need to do more to create good paying jobs. We have to have a living wage for our all workers, and that'll be a priority for me. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you, Veterans in Politics, for hosting us, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. My name is Jim Small, and it's an Indiana Hoosier Day. I'm originally from Indiana myself, and spent my entire younger life there and went through the public school system in Indiana. I'm a retired federal employee. I've worked 35 years with the federal government in offices around the country, starting in Indianapolis, Indiana, and then in additional other offices. My career was a legal-based career. I supervised the work of a number of lawyers and was responsible for their actions and the administration of the agency. Now, why do I want to be a state assemblyman in Assembly District 2? I'm running because we need to have integrity back in the state assembly. The primary opponent that I'm running against signed a no-tax pledge, and then he reneged on that no-tax pledge. I intend to follow my commitment. I intend to uphold that commitment and bring integrity to the legislative process there. I have extensive experience in alternate dispute resolution, which is something that's going to be necessary in the legislature, trying to work with the other side. I'm going to do that. I have extensive background in labor relations and collective bargaining, probably one of the most extensive backgrounds in this state, and I believe the state collective bargaining system needs to be adjusted, reformed, and the state pension system for public employees needs to be adjusted and informed, and I'm going to work diligently for that. And most importantly, I'm going to work with the other side, with the Democrats, to see if we can bring some common sense regulation to the whole opioid crisis and opioid regulation situation. We need to do that, and we can do that in a nonpartisan manner. I appreciate the time that the Veterans in Politics is providing us today, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you, candidates, and I will now turn this over to the panel for questioning.
Robert Faust. My question to you is, what is the first, not the first, but what is one law that is in place right now that you would consider repealing?
I'll be glad to start if that's okay.
That's fine.
The regulations related to opioids are out there. They're causing problems for doctors, they're causing problems for patients, and indeed some of them are simply ridiculous. Did you know that it now requires a 45-minute visit to your doctor, filling out forms, to get a codeine cough syrup? I found that out just recently, and my doctor went on and on about how he has difficulty trying to write pain medication prescriptions because it's simply not a workable system that's in place right now. Yes, we need to have those sorts of regulations, but we don't need to have regulations that are unfair to the practitioners or unfair to patients. So I'd certainly be doing that on a nonpartisan basis, right from the get-go.
Yeah, Jim's right. This is an area where we've overregulated. We've got a serious problem with drug abuse, but we pass laws that make it hard to prescribe for legitimate uses. My wife has allergies, and it's very hard for her to get the medication she needs because of the red tape that we've created. On the other side, we have good practices that we know to treat opioid addiction, and we don't implement them effectively. We have drug courts that don't provide the best treatment for drug addicts. We divert these low-level offenders appropriately into treatment rather than jail, which is a much better path for them. But then the courts don't make available the effective treatments that we know are out there. So we need to remove the barriers to good treatment and make sure we do implement the good treatment where we can.
Do you support a voter
Introduce
ID?
yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Name is Geraldi. Do you support a voter ID law? And if so, if yes or no, why? I'll go with David first.
Yeah, well, we already do a good job of identifying voters, and the kinds of voter ID laws that we've seen in other states are a solution in search of a problem. They're supposed to weed out voter fraud at the polls, but we don't have evidence of that. To the extent that there are problems with fraud, we see that actually with absentee voting, and the voter ID laws do nothing to deal with that concern. So, no, I don't think we've seen in state after state that have implemented these voter ID laws. They haven't solved any problems, and they've just made it harder for people who should be able to vote and want to exercise their fundamental right to vote. They've been prevented from doing that, and that's wrong, because our country is built on the fact that we have a representative democracy. We have to make sure that everybody's voice is heard.
We certainly need, indeed, we must have proper identification for voters when they're voting. I'm clearly on the other side of the table here than David. I believe we need people to show identification, state-issued identification, that describes who they are, and then that is very, very essential. Recently, I had friends, indeed relatives from Indiana visiting, and we were at one of the local casinos, and we passed out our ID for whatever reason, because the casinos expect that. And a conversation arose with my relatives from Indiana about us not having voter ID here and not being required to have that identification when we voted, and they kind of chuckled about that. They said in Indiana that had been going on for some time. And we certainly need it. I'm all on board with it. I chuckle when I see organizations who are opposed to voter ID holding meetings, and then on their meeting announcements they say, oh, identification required at the door. And that's quite entertaining to see that incongruent sort of position. The short answer is yes, we need voter ID.
Robert Faust. So how would you vote on restroom transgenders, on the transgender restroom issue?
I think we need to protect the rights of all our citizens. I teach constitutional law, and one of the most important parts of our rights is the right to be treated equally, not to be discriminated on the basis of our race, our sex, our religion, our ethnic origin, or our sexual orientation or our sexual gender status. And we need to make sure that everybody feels comfortable in this country and doesn't have to worry about being discriminated against because of their gender orientation or their gender preference. And this is, I think, a clear issue, and we need to be vigilant about it.
I learned in that education back in Indiana, a very good education, I believe, that we have two sexes and only two sexes. Now, while that somehow offends individuals thinking there are 20 or 30 different sexes, I'm going to stay with the two sexes position. We can work with each other and reach reasonable accommodations for transgender individuals while not trampling upon the rights of those who are not transgender. As for restroom accommodations, a male-female sign on the door seems to be a way to work. There are college campuses where the dormitories are co-ed. It can work. Many of us at home have male and female people in our households, and we are able to successfully share bathroom facilities without any problem. The bathrooms can be arranged in a way that both sexes can use them privately and in an appropriate manner.
Speaking of the Constitution,
Introduce yourself.
again?
Yeah, it's for the feed.
Oh, okay. To introduce myself, Jay Geraldi. Speaking of the Constitution, and our founders, our founders said that the First Amendment was written to protect offensive speech. Is that true or untrue? Start with you, David.
Well, it's an interesting question. As I indicated, I teach constitutional law, and I talk about the First Amendment, and one of the things that is unclear is exactly what the framers had in mind and what they meant by freedom of speech. The narrow view is, some people say, all they worried about was government censorship. And, you can't prevent people from speaking, but in their view, maybe the government can punish you if they don't like your speech. But the way it's evolved, we have come to the view that it's not for the government to decide what speech is appropriate, that we need to leave that to the listener, and that we get the best results if we let everybody speak and let the listener sort it out. Because if we give the government the power to decide whose speech is offensive and whose is appropriate, odds are, and we've seen from other countries that allow governments to do that, they don't make very good choices. And one famous Supreme Court decision says one person's offensive word, vulgar word, is another person's lyric. And on matters of taste, it's can't let the government decide. Now, the downside is there's some pretty offensive speech that is tolerated, and often, and many people go too far, misuse their right, and that is a serious problem, and we need to speak out against that when people do that. But that's for us as citizens to do, not for the government to do for us.
I would join David's response in that regard. The idea of protecting offensive speech isn't necessarily, I believe, the direct purpose of the First Amendment, but what one person considers offensive, someone else may not consider offensive. And that's very, very important for us to keep in mind. I can consider burning the flag as an offensive behavior, but it's protected as free speech under our constitutional interpretations. Did I answer your question, Jay?
Yes.
Robert Foust. So could you identify the main problem, the number one problem in your district that you think that you're qualified to remedy, and how are you going to remedy it?
All right. The Assembly District 2 has the good fortune of being an affluent district. It's Summerlin South. The development in the area is pretty darn nice. Our problems are I think, inherent in the whole education system. The education system that we have here in our state does not really promote the idea that we are going to be a better state. It promotes the idea that we're going to be 50th or 51st or 49th in where we are in the United States. So the educational system needs to be resolved and reformed, corrected, and I believe that would be the biggest issue for Assembly District 2.
I agree that in making sure we have a first-class education system has to be our highest priority. I grew up in a great public school system, and it's so important because when we're trying to attract companies and new jobs, they want to know, am I going to have a skilled, educated workforce that's prepared for the new economy? And we're not there yet. And so the way I like to put it is, we need to win the race to the top when we're competing with other states to attract jobs to our state. And the race to the top is you make this the #1 state in education and other important amenities of life, rather than doing a race to the bottom where you try to cut your spending to the bone and then you really sacrifice really important public services.
Jay Geraldi, do you think that the state government should regulate hate speech? And if so, why or why not?
Well, hate speech is a real problem, and it can lead to serious harm when people act on the basis of hate speech. But the problem is, as we talked about with offensive speech, the government is not really, under our view of the First Amendment of the Constitution, it's not the government's role to police speech. Citizens need to denounce hate speech. It's wrongful, and when it leads to harmful conduct, then we can act as a government against harmful conduct, but mere hate speech is one of the prices we pay for having a First Amendment and the free speech that's so essential to our constitutional system.
I was asked recently if I thought it was appropriate that racists be prohibited from running for public office. This relates to the hate speech issue. And my answer was no, they should not be prohibited. Let the voters decide what the voters believe is in the best interest of the country. That means people, again, with offensive speech, offensive behavior patterns, are out there, they're permitted to be out there, they're permitted to say their stupid, vulgar, terrible things, and as long as those terrible things are not acted upon, we should allow that to continue. That's why we have the First Amendment. Those protections are there. We should not go out of our way to prohibit that sort of thinking, because today's hate speech may be tomorrow's norm. Things have changed historically, and it's, I think, impossible to regulate what might be considered inappropriate over time. It's just not a very good idea. Back when we were young, certain words on the television would have never been aired, and now they are on a regular basis. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, well, it's just a change over time on that whole issue.
Does the panel have any further questions? And that will end the interview for District 2.
Do you want to give them a minute to have a speech on why we should vote for them?
Sure, thank you. And to conclude District 2, each of the candidates can reintroduce themselves and have a minute to say why the electors should vote for you.
My name is Jim Small. I'm running for Assembly in Assembly District 2. My slogan is easy to remember. It's think big, vote small. Now, why should you nominate me and then elect me as your representative in Assembly District 2? I'm going to strive hard to repeal the commerce tax. It was a bad decision, a bad tax. I'm going to work to that end. I'm going to work to correct some of the problematic situations we have with business licensing and whole business tax situation. We need to take care of that. I'm going to strive to see that this state does not become a sanctuary state, and I'm going to work diligently to that end. And I will work to see that we are one of the best states in the country for the growth of business. I am a dedicated campaigner. I'm out everywhere. My ads are up. You've probably seen them. And I'm working. I'm striving to receive the nomination. I intend to do that. And I look forward to your assistance and your help in that regard. Think big, vote small.
Well, thank you for hosting us again to Veterans in Politics. I'm David Orentlicher. David O is a little easier. And it's a hard name, but it means very honest, and that's the way I try to live my life. I teach medical ethics. My background is in medicine and law, and I teach at UNLV School of Law. I'm going to be the same kind of representative, assembly person in Nevada that I was a member of the legislature in Indiana. And that is working hard for the critical issues for the citizens of the state. That is to make sure we have a first-class public education system so all of our children have the opportunity to fulfill their potential, to make sure that healthcare is affordable and accessible. As a physician, I know firsthand the problems of patients who can't afford a doctor. And it's bad for the patients, and as a physician, you feel helpless when you can't provide care that you know your patients need. We have to make sure all people have access to affordable health care. We need to do more, make sure that we provide support for startup businesses where we create the most jobs in our country for the new companies, and that's what I worked on in Indiana. And we need to make sure that we have safe neighborhoods, that we address crime problems, and we learn from the criminal justice experts who can tell us the best ways to protect our neighborhoods. So again, David Orentlicher in Assembly District 2, and I'd be grateful for your vote in June 12th and November 6th.
Thank you, candidates.
And that concludes?
And that concludes the interviews for Assembly District 2.